Start with 1919. And the reason is because 1919, 100 years ago this year, there was a really important event that took place in Egypt that actually framed much of what ends up happening in the Middle East over the course of the next 100 years. And that event is a revolution. Egypt went into a state of revolution in 1880. The British took advantage of the chaos that Egypt was in the 1880 revolution, and invaded Egypt in 1882 and conquered it and annexed it to the British Empire. 37 years later, Egypt goes into a second revolution. This time, it's explicitly to try to get the British out. But when dealing with the British Empire, you never, ever fully pull it off. In the case of Egypt, they do the same thing. They go, okay, you want more autonomy, you want more independence, that's cool, but we're going to maintain a permanent military presence, and we're going to keep the Suez Canal. You don't get to completely go independent. The reason that the 1919 revolution matters so much, though, is because it created, or at least illustrated, the directions in which the Arab world was about to go down, or at least attempt to go down. To make the revolution successful, it wasn't enough to just want the British gone, or at least partially gone. Egyptians needed to create an ideology that motivated people to go into the streets and be willing to die to fight the British. Independence wasn't enough. They needed something else. And a group of Christian Egyptians, the Coptic Orthodox Church is the Christian church in Egypt, a group of Coptic Egyptians actually ended up creating the dominant ideology for the 1919 revolution. And that revolution's ideology was pan-Arab secular socialism. The idea, the pan-Arab part, is that everything from Morocco to Iraq should be unified into a single Arab state. The secular part was that it would not be religiously motivated, and it would be tolerant towards the minority religions that existed within that new republic. And then the socialism was socialism, not communism, but socialism, as in something resembling what Sweden is. The pan-Arab secular socialists dominated the revolution, and as a result, they planted the seed for its eventual future successes. Having said that, then there's a reaction against it. So the pan-Arab secular socialism becomes the dominant ideology in Egypt, so two new ideologies pop up to push back against that new ideology. One of them is what we now call the Fulul. The Fulul are actually a group of Egyptians. They're not truly an ideology because they don't have a coherent set of beliefs. They just sort of change their beliefs as necessary. They're not necessarily secular. They don't really care about separation between mosque and state. But at the same time, they don't mind it either. Like, they're not attached to having a religion mixed with the state, but they're not attached to having a secular state either. When it's convenient, they bring up religion. When it's not convenient, they reject religion. What they are is they are capitalists. Now, what they've concluded, what the Fulul believe, is that Egyptians are inherently, by their nature, socialists. That is to say that Egyptians have a strong community tie to each other, that they think of their neighbors and their family members first, and then they think about themselves and their own greedy ambitions last. So the Fulul believe that's terrible. That if you're going to modernize, what you need to do is create the liberal model of capitalism, where everybody is sort of dog-eat-dog, rational self-interest, always motivated about yourself and your own economic interests. You never care about anybody else. So what the Fulul believe is the only way to achieve that in Egypt is to create tyranny and then shove this down the throat of the Arab population. That you have to break Arab culture, and you have to make Arabs more like Americans, where it's just isolated little bubbles, where you don't have contact with each other, you don't have strong family ties, you kind of hate your family, and you'd rather just binge watch Netflix and shop in malls and never actually have human experiences, right? That's their model. That's what they think it would be a utopia. The third group were the Islamists, and they were, of course, encapsulated in Egypt by the Muslim Brotherhood. The idea there was that they didn't care whether it was Arab or not Arab. What they wanted was Muslim. So everything from Morocco to Indonesia should be unified into a single state, if you got to that. But they didn't really care. That wasn't really a motive of theirs. The real motive was that in every Muslim state, the laws should reflect the religion, and there should be no separation between mosque and state. So 1919 is this breakout moment for the Middle East because it creates the three dominant ideologies. Having said that, there's another vector. So there's that plane, but then there's another vector. And it's also three. And it's what type of political system should you have? Should you be a democracy? Should you be a monarchy? Should you be a republic? And by republic, it's a euphemism for a benevolent tyranny. In other words, do you need to have a heavy-handed ruler who will transition your state? Like the Fulul believe, you need a heavy-handed ruler who will transition the state into a capitalist system? Or do you want to open it up to the public? Or do you want to just have a monarchy be in charge? At the point where Egypt gets essentially its autonomy in 1920, in the aftermath of the 1919 revolution, it's a monarchy. It has a king. And so the assumption is that Egypt will kind of go down a Fulul path with this monarch at the head, even though the dominant people in the revolution were these pan-Arab secular socialists who don't want that. What they wanted to do is create a republic, not have a monarchy. But that's the path they're on. This is sort of the British compromise. And so that's the background for Egypt's role in this. What it does, though, is it inspires other Arab states. And one of those other Arab states, really it's a country at this point because it's actually divided into two pieces, is Yemen. South Yemen got captured by the British Empire and was actually attached to India, even though geographically it's clearly not India. They're brown people, lump them together, no big deal. It's the British Empire, they can do whatever they want. What ends up happening is the British know the writing's on the wall, the empire is starting to come apart at the seams. There's a matter of time before they're going to lose South Yemen. While that's taking place, pan-Arab secular socialism gets this huge victory. In 1952, Egypt does another revolution. So in 72 years, Egypt has 3 revolutions. In the middle of the revolution, the army, a part of the army, is very heavily interested in pan-Arab secular socialism. That part of the army includes 4 colonels from the Sudan. In 1952, they end up in charge of the army, coup d'etat. So the army actually does a coup on the monarchy and overthrows the king of Egypt. A guy named Gamal Abdel Nasser more or less ends up in charge of Egypt. He's not officially the president. There's a guy named Mohammed Najib who's the president. What happens is Mohammed Najib is literally, the CIA walks into his office with suitcases of money. And Nasser, the colonel, he wasn't even a general, who was basically in charge of the coup that overthrew the monarchy, just simply disappears. Mohammed Najib takes the money. And then he has a constitutional convention, holds elections, and in 1956 he becomes president of Egypt, and they bring in a new constitution. That constitution is a pan-Arab secular socialist constitution. It sets it up so that Nasser is going to be the tyrant. So, right, it's not a democracy, it's not a monarchy, it's going to be a tyrant, but benevolent tyrant. In 1958, Syria, the Syrian state, was on the brink of collapse. The reason why Syria was in so much trouble is when it got its independence from France after World War II, it got its independence as a democracy. It's one of the few Arab states to start off as a democracy. Most of them get their independence from European states as a monarchy or a tyranny. Here's Syria with its vibrant, brand new, shiny democracy. Everything's looking great. 1946. World is new, alive. Syria is rich. And then we overthrow the democracy in 1949. The CIA goes in, does a coup, punks them, and it plunges Syria into a nightmare hell chaos. For the next 9 years, Syria cycles through 11 different leaders. There's a coup, and then there's a coup against the coup, and then there's a coup. It's madness. The Syrian state basically is on the verge of collapse. Ironically enough, al-Quwatli, the guy who got couped, the first elected president in 46, the guy who got coup d'etat by the CIA in 1949, ends up back in charge of Syria. He manages to get into the position of president and takes over. He then sends Nasser a message. He goes, look, Syria's done. Our state is about to collapse. We're about to become a failed state. But worse yet, there's a high probability that the communists are going to prevail in the chaos that follows, and they're going to take over in Syria. I desperately hate the communists. I want nothing to do with them. I'm a socialist. I'm a pan-Arab secular socialist at heart. I think this is the way forward, not communism. You've got to save us. Nasser's like, yeah, of course. What can I do? What can I do? And al-Qawatli goes, annex Syria. Annex it right now. Nasser goes, wait a minute, what? He goes, yeah, we're done. Let's do it. You want to do a pan-Arab secular state? Right now. Syria and Egypt, merge. I'm the president of Syria. I'm going to sign Syria over to you. You're going to become the president of Syria. And Nasser goes, we're not ready. We don't have the infrastructure. We don't have the political sense. I've been running Egypt for 6 years now. I don't have any experience. Nobody knows what they're doing. We're still figuring this out. We just got out from underneath the British Empire. I'm letting Sudan go its own way. You want us to annex you? And al-Qawatli goes, you have a choice. I'm putting it to you. You annex us, or we go communist. And Nasser hated the communists. And he went, all right, annexation it is. The two presidents sit next to each other. They sign over a treaty. Egypt and Syria merge. They officially lose the name Egypt and Syria, and they become United Arab Republic. Cairo is the capital of the United Arab Republic. Gamal Abdel Nasser is the president of the United Arab Republic. It's done. This truly inspires. The same year, 1958, Iraq goes into revolution. It was conquered by the British in 1920. They installed a monarchy. King Faisal I and then King Faisal II. Faisal II is killed in the revolution in 1958. And the Iraqi parliament is taken over by the pan-Arab secular socialists. They immediately want to merge Iraq with Syria and Egypt and create a single state. If you look at Syria, Egypt, and Iraq's flag, it's all red, white, black. Red stripe, white stripe, black stripe. Because this is what they wanted to do, was merge into a single pan-Arab secular state. Having said that, the United States knew that that's what the pan-Arab secular socialists wanted to do in Iraq. So what we did was, we interrupted it by funding the communists. That was our strategy in the Middle East, that wherever we could, no matter what, no matter whom we hurt, we would always go ahead and side with the other guy against the pan-Arab secular socialists. So in Egypt, we funded the Muslim Brotherhood. In Iraq, we funded the communists. The Soviet Union and us sent money to the same people in Iraq. And what we did was we made it so that the executive branch of the new Iraqi government, the new Iraqi democracy that emerges from the revolution, the 1958 revolution, we made it so that that part was actually communist. And because they were the executive branch, they didn't then ask to join. Don't worry, the guy we got into power, we killed him 5 years later in a CIA assassination. So, right, it all worked out in the end. Oh, and if the United States ever offers to help you and you're a revolutionary, never take the help. You will be killed later. So just lessons to learn. In the Kingdom of Yemen, which is North Yemen, the Yemenis decide they want to go down the same path, and they overthrow their monarchy. So they do a repeat of the 1958 overthrow in Iraq. The Kingdom of Yemen now becomes the Republic of Yemen, and then they're immediately in trouble. And the reason is because the monarchists take to the field and begin a civil war. They don't accept the overthrow of the monarchy. Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United States begin pumping supplies, weapons, money, special forces into North Yemen on the side of the monarchists, fighting the guys who are trying to create a republic, a pan-Arab secular socialist republic in Yemen. So, just to make sure we're clear, today, there's a civil war in Yemen, and the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia are again on the same exact side in the contemporary Yemeni civil war as they were in 1962. The newly established president of North Yemen realizes he doesn't have the ability to fight the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia on his own, And so he goes to Egypt and he says, we desperately need your help. Just to add a twist to the whole thing, the previous year, 1961, Syria felt abused by Egypt, and Syria was. Nasser really messed that up. And Syria broke away. So the United Arab Republic lasted a whole of 3 years. So the next year, 1962, Yemen invites Egypt to jump in to side with the secular socialist rebels against the monarchists. Nasser sends the Egyptian military in. Now, historians will say this was Egypt's Vietnam. Since the Tonkin Gulf Resolution didn't happen until '65, it's historically more accurate to say that Vietnam was the United States' Yemen. It is a disaster. The Egyptian military doesn't know who to shoot. They don't know where the front line is. And it's just 8 years of this. To make a long story short, the civil war in Yemen ends up ending because of basically Israel attacking Egypt. In 1967, Israel attacks Egypt. Egypt had 3/4 of its military assets in Yemen. And in 6 days, Israel defeats Egypt, mostly because Egypt just didn't have any military assets to fight with. Egypt was caught with its pants down around its ankle. In the days leading up to the 1967 Six-Day War, Nasser was trying to negotiate out a way to prevent the war. And he had actually contacted LBJ and said, look, I think the Israelis are going to attack me. I need to start pulling assets up from Yemen if that's the case. Can you assure me that they're not going to attack? And LBJ said, I swear Israel isn't going to attack you. You're fine. Don't worry about it. And so Nasser doesn't pull up assets because he believed the president of the United States. Oh, that's dumb. And of course, the Israelis punk Egypt, Syria, and Jordan in this humiliating, catastrophic rout. Egypt had a 222-plane air force, and the whole thing was caught on the ground and annihilated before a single plane got in the air. It's just a catastrophe. At that point, Egypt's no longer interested in fighting the Yemeni civil war. It just doesn't know how to extract itself. And so the war lingers for another 3 years. Finally, in 1970, kind of on a whim, Saudi Arabia says, hey, Egypt, do you want to come to Saudi Arabia and negotiate out a deal, an end deal? And Nasser's like, I am there. Whatever we can do to get out of this disaster. They go, they meet. And within a couple of days, they sign a deal. And the deal ends the civil war. It allows Yemen, through referendum, to choose whether it's going to become a monarchy or remain a republic. The Yemeni people vote. They vote for republic. So the Egyptian side wins. The Saudi, Israeli, US side loses in a popular vote. And Yemen becomes a republic. Well, it had been since '62, North Yemen anyway. In 1978, Ali Abdullah Saleh becomes the president of North Yemen. He is, on paper, a pan-Arab secular socialist. That's the stock, the ideological stock he's from. There's another guy like him who becomes the president of Iraq, same time, and his name is Saddam Hussein. He also, on paper, is a pan-Arab secular socialist. But the reason I'm saying on paper is because in reality, the only thing they care about is their own power and ruling their own state. In other words, yeah, they would love to do this grand scheme that makes for liberty and improves the quality of life for the entire Arab world, but they've sort of given up. And one of the reasons is because of what happens in the 1973 Arab-Israeli war. So Egypt attacks Israel for the first time. This is the first time an Arab state attacked Israel. In 1973, and the reason why Egypt does finally attack Israel is because they wanted the Sinai back. Israel captured the Sinai in the Six-Day War, and it's a catastrophe for Egypt. In part because most of its natural gas and all of its oil was in the Sinai, so it immediately cut off Egypt, an oil-poor, natural gas-poor state, from its energy resources. Another reason why they want the Sinai back so desperately is as long as the Israeli military is on one side of the Suez Canal and the Egyptian military is on the other side of the Suez Canal, it's shut down. The Israelis actually sank ships in the Suez Canal to prevent any traffic from going through. As long as no traffic is going through, Egypt isn't getting that revenue because all the ships that go through have to pay Egypt for passage. And so without that revenue, it's actually stifling Egypt's economy. So Egypt has to attack Israel to get that territory back because it's a matter of life and death economically. And they do. During the war, Egypt basically destroys the Israeli Sinai military in 2 days. It's a catastrophe for the Israelis. It's a repeat of the 67 war, except it's the reverse. It's the Israelis getting punked this time. Kissinger calls up Israel and says, hey, I'm here for you. We're gonna be there side by side during your surrender negotiations as you give up the Sinai to Egypt. Israel went, absolutely not. Under no circumstances will we ever negotiate from a position of weakness. If you want us to negotiate, you have to help us militarily first. So we literally fly every tank that we have available. We spray off. We used to put white stars on a tank. We spray them off. The Israelis put on a triangle. And we fly these tanks to Israel, and we immediately rearm Israel with a tank army. The Israelis jump in the tanks. Kissinger calls them up and goes, all right, now you're in a position of strength, let's negotiate. Israel goes, no, we have to punk Egypt first. We can't have been losing the war and be in a position of strength. We have to be winning the war. And so they counterattack. They cut the Egyptian Sinai army in half. They cross the Suez Canal, and they're charging into Egypt proper. The Soviet Union calls the United States. Hey, just want you to know, the Israeli army is getting way too close to Damascus and way too close to Cairo. If they go any further, if the Israelis cross the 100-kilometer mark inside Egypt proper, on the west side of the Suez Canal, we're going in. And they had a line for Damascus as well. We're going in. Kissinger calls up Israel. Hey, gotta tell you, this is really sad, but the Soviets have told us they're gonna go in. You should know we're not coming in after them. This is just gonna be you against the Soviet Union. Probably not gonna work out real well for you, but we're not gonna start World War III over this. You should have surrendered. You tricked me, and now I've given you this army, and now you're using it in a way I didn't mean for you to use, and now you're about to start World War III. We're not gonna do this. You're on your own. So the Israelis, when they got to the 100-kilometer mark, they brought a road cutter with them, and they cut a strip of highway out of the road at the 100-kilometer mark and took it back to a museum in Israel to show that they had been in 100 kilometers. And then they stopped, just as the Soviet paratroopers were loading into the airplanes. The Israelis stopped. Kissinger goes, all right, now let's negotiate. So the Israelis go, yep, we're ready. It's good. Kissinger then flies to Syria. He goes to President Hafez al-Assad, the father of the current Syrian tyrant. He goes to Hafez al-Assad and he says, look, I want to make a comprehensive peace deal. I want to make it so there's never another Arab-Israeli war. I want to make it so that the Middle East becomes the stable beacon of hope for the whole planet. What I want to do is I want to make a comprehensive deal that includes Israel, the Palestinians, Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, Lebanon, everybody. We're going to get everybody at a table, we're going to sit them down, and we're going to make some kind of deal that sets up the Palestinians so that they're not a stateless people stuck in refugee camps for all eternity. We're going to do something that makes the Israelis feel secure. We're going to get you the Golan Heights back. We're going to get Egypt the Sinai back. We're going to figure out what Jordan's water rights are to the Jordan River. All of this, a whole thing. And Hafez al-Assad is like, wow, you're going to do this for real? This is incredible. I'm on board. I will support the United States any way I can. This is remarkable. Kissinger's like, thank you so much. Jumps on an airplane. Flies to Egypt. Kissinger sits down with Sadat and says, so I've been talking to everybody. I talked to the Palestinians, I talked to the Israelis, I talked to the Syrians, I talked to the Jordanians. I got to tell you, it's grim. It's grim. The Syrians don't want to cooperate. The Jordanians don't want to cooperate. The Palestinians don't want to cooperate. Look, the only way forward is to abandon everybody and make a separate peace deal with the Israelis. Just Egypt and Israel. Because nobody else is going to work with you. They're all only thinking about themselves. They're going to backstab you. It's bad. Isn't this amazing? This is U.S. diplomacy. at its finest. Sadat goes, okay, I guess, what am I going to do? I can't fight the United States. I had to fight the United States military. We were defeated. We beat the Israeli military. It took us 2 days. But who can fight the United States? I'm going to surrender. I'm going to make a separate peace deal. Hafez al-Assad hears what Kissinger has done, that Egypt's going to make a separate peace deal. He freaks out. He feels betrayed, backstabbed. He can't believe it. Kissinger came with all these promises, and the next thing you know, he's doing the opposite. It is cemented. Syria hates the United States. The Syrian government hates the United States. The Syrian government is going to be pro-Soviet and later pro-Russian for all eternity, because in the mind of the president and then later his son, there is no way to work with the United States because we are liars and manipulators. The reason why Kissinger did it was Kissinger believed that the way you created security for the United States was you created chaos in the rest of the world. Your goal was to upend the global system, shake it, break it, make it so there was so much chaos that nobody could have a coherent foreign policy. And then the United States could operate in that chaos. Get countries pitted against each other, split alliances. He split the Egyptian-Syrian alliance. Egypt was never a real full-fledged ally of the Soviet Union, but it was the Soviet Union that armed Egypt. It was the Soviet Union that was willing to back up Egypt, to step up when Egypt was in trouble. Kissinger wanted to break that too. And what he wanted to do was peel Egypt out of this pan-Arab secular socialist thing and bring it into the US camp. One of the things they promise Egypt is that Egypt will work with Israel, it will trade with Israel, it will normalize relations with Israel. Egypt will never fight Israel again. In return, whatever the United States is giving Israel in official foreign aid, it will give Egypt half of that in foreign aid. So to this day, Egypt and Israel combined get 1/3 of the entire US foreign aid package. Two countries get 1/3. Israel gets two shares for every Egyptian share. But the whole thing is based on the role that Israel plays in creating chaos in the Middle East. And the role that the United States then doesn't have to play because it's Israel that's doing the chaos. The reason all of this matters is by 1978, when Saddam Hussein is taking over Iraq, and when Ali Abdullah Saleh is taking over Yemen, they know they're up against the United States because the United States is doing everything it can to prevent pan-Arab secular socialism from taking hold, including funding the Muslim Brotherhood, including funding communists, including funding everything and anything it can, including doing bloody civil wars like the civil war in Yemen. And so they become pragmatists. And that pragmatism means that they're just tyrants, right? They're visionless tyrants who aren't actually trying to achieve some greater goal. Like their tyranny doesn't lead to liberty for their people, their tyranny just keeps them in power. So in Iraq, where we've been fighting ISIL, we've been allied with Iran against ISIL. In Yemen, where we're fighting the Houthis, we've been allied with ISIL against the Iranian-backed Houthis. That's just Kissinger's policy of chaos. Make a completely incoherent world where everything's chaos. In one war, you're on the same side, and the next war, you're fighting each other. And just make it so it's impossible for anybody to have a coherent foreign policy but the United States. That's the goal. Sow chaos. Kill Arabs. Create genocide. Arabs are 6% of the world's population. The United States is 4.5%, just for perspective. And Arabs are 50% of the world's refugees. We are currently in the world's worst ever refugee crisis. This is worse than what happened after World War II. Turkey is the largest refugee host country on earth. It has 4 million refugees. Germany got to 1 million and Angela Merkel's government almost toppled. Turkey has 4 million. Kissinger admits this. This isn't like a secret. Kissinger said this is the Kissinger doctrine. Sow chaos everywhere. Make the world crazy. And then you can be the sane person in the midst of the madness.